The Monday morning that changed everything began the way most crises do. Quietly, without announcement. And just before the coffee finished brewing, Victoria Harlan stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the 43rd floor, watching the city arrange itself in rows of steel and gray. She held her phone in one hand and a tablet in the other. Neither device carried good news. Harrison Wolfe, her driver of 4 years, the man who knew her schedule better than her assistant, had been escorted from the building at 7:15 that morning by 2 members of her security team. The evidence was damning and clean. A screenshot of her itinerary for the Meridian acquisition meeting, time-stamped and forwarded to a private address connected to Caldwell Capital, the company her board most feared, the company circling them for the better part of 6 months. "We need someone today," said her assistant, Dana Reeves, from the doorway. Dana was 28 and efficient to the point of being unsettling. She carried a clipboard in an era when everyone else used tablets, which Victoria respected. "The afternoon run to Blackwood Partners is at 2. And then the Pemberton dinner at 7:30. Find someone. Through the agency, it'll be 48 hours minimum. Their vetting process, then find someone outside the agency." Dana paused. She was the kind of woman who paused with purpose, to signal that she was about to say something her employer would not want to hear. "There's a man downstairs. He came in about the security coordinator position. But we're not hiring for that. He's been waiting since 8. Victoria turned from the window. "Why are you telling me about a man who came for the wrong position?" "Because before he waited, he flagged to our front desk that a silver Audi had been idling across the street for 42 minutes with its engine on. He wrote the plate number on a card and asked them to pass it along." Dana held up a small white card. "Security ran it. The car is registered to a shell company with known ties to Caldwell's private intelligence unit." A silence fell over the room that had a specific quality. The kind that comes just before a decision gets made. "Bring him up," Victoria said. His name was Daniel Carver. He was 38, though he looked both younger and older depending on how the light hit him, younger in posture and stillness, older around the eyes. He wore a plain dark shirt that was clean but not pressed, and dark trousers that fit well enough that they were either tailored from a long time ago or he hadn't changed size in a decade. He carried no briefcase, no folder, nothing. What he did carry was a child. The girl was 7 years old and small for her age, with her father's calm eyes and a serious expression that suggested she found the world endlessly interesting and only somewhat worth commenting on. Her name, Victoria would later learn, was Maisie. She had a sketchbook tucked under one arm. "Mr. Carver," Victoria said, taking in both of them with a single sweep. "Miss Harlan." He didn't apologize for the child. He didn't explain her. He simply introduced her. "My daughter, Maisie. My sitter had a family emergency. I'll find alternate care for her immediately if this becomes an issue." "What position were you applying for?" "Security coordination." A pause. "But I understand that's not open." Victoria studied him for exactly 4 seconds. She had a talent for reading people in increments, a skill she'd developed not in boardrooms but long before them. In a home where reading the room fast was a matter of self-preservation. "I need a driver," she said. "Starting this afternoon." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. More like consideration. "That's a step down from what I came for. Temporarily. My regular driver was terminated this morning for leaking my schedule." She held his gaze. "You flagged a vehicle outside in under an hour, without being asked. When you had no reason to believe anyone would care. That's more useful to me right now than a resume." He glanced briefly at his daughter, who had already opened her sketchbook and begun drawing something on the low table near the wall. "What are the terms?" he asked. "Day rate, car provided, immediate start. You'll need a background check. Send me what you need." She nodded. "Dana will handle it. You'll need to clear today by noon." She turned away, which was her method of ending conversations. Then she turned back, because something made her. "Does she always come to your interviews?" Daniel Carver looked at his daughter, who was now drawing what appeared to be a very detailed architectural floor plan of the room, and almost smiled. "Only when I think the interview might be worth going to," he said. He passed every layer of the background check within 3 hours. The speed alone was unusual. The results were more so. Clean in the way that high-functioning people's records tend to be, which is to say that there was enough there to be credible but precise gaps, where one would expect either mess or history. Employment prior to 6 years ago was marked as classified, government adjacent, through a contractor firm that had since dissolved. No criminal record, no flags, 3 references from a personal protection consultancy in Denver that no longer actively operated. Dana placed the summary on Victoria's desk at 11:48. Victoria read it, set it face down, and said nothing. At 12:05, Daniel Carver pulled the company car around to the private entrance. He was already there when Victoria came down. He was standing outside the driver's door, not leaning against it standing. His posture was the kind that came from somewhere other than military service alone, though that was clearly part of it. He held the rear door open without ceremony. Maisie was not in the car. He had arranged something. Victoria got in, opened her tablet, and for the next 40 minutes said nothing. He said nothing. The route to Blackwood Partners took 22 minutes in normal traffic. He arrived in 19 without speeding, without running any light, by simply knowing which streets to choose. When he pulled into the parking structure, he stopped at a specific pillar and waited. "The entrance is another 60 meters forward," Victoria said, without looking up. "Yes," he said. "Then why have you stopped?" He looked into the rearview mirror, not at the road behind them, but at the level where he could catch her eyes. "There's a man at the main entrance who's been standing there for 11 minutes. He's on his phone, but he's not talking. He's watching the elevator bank." A brief pause. "Your contact at Blackwood is Richard Ferris, correct?" "Yes." "Does he know you're coming through the main entrance?" She looked up for the first time. "No," she said. "Only Dana has that." He said nothing further. He simply put the car into reverse. She took the loading entrance. She met Ferris without incident. She signed what needed to be signed, and left 40 minutes later through a service corridor that Daniel had walked ahead to check himself while she waited in a maintenance office that smelled of industrial cleaning solution and old carpet. In the car on the way back, she finally asked, "How did you know?" He was wearing a visitor badge, but had arrived before visitor hours open. The badge was generic, the kind facilities use for contractors, not guests. A pause. He was also standing in a position that gave him line of sight to both the elevator and the stairs. That's not where someone waits for a meeting. She looked at the back of his head. Most people would have said something to security. "Security here is outsourced," he said. "If there's a leak in your organization, outsourced vendors are usually one of the first places to look." She let that sit. That evening, she did not go to the Pemberton dinner. She canceled with 3 hours' notice, citing a scheduling conflict, and instead sat in her office with the blinds drawn and made 4 phone calls. One to her general counsel, one to the head of her internal audit team, one to an IT director she trusted completely and had trusted since he'd worked for her 2 companies ago. One to nobody she dialed and then did not press send. The 4th call was to her own number. A test. She had given Daniel Carver a false itinerary that morning. A meeting at a different address, at a different time, with a different firm. A meeting that did not exist. At 7:14 p.m., Dana walked in and placed a single printout on her desk. A Caldwell Capital vehicle had been spotted outside the false address at the exact scheduled time. Victoria stared at the printout for a long time. Someone inside her organization was feeding information in near real time, and the man she had hired this morning on instinct, almost carelessly, because of a license plate written on a card had, without knowing it, helped her design the trap that proved it. She did not tell him this. Not yet. Instead, she began to observe him in the way she observed everything, methodically, with the patience that came from running a company for 9 years and learning that the truth of any situation only revealed itself to those willing to wait it out. He arrived at 7:15 each morning and was gone each evening by the time she released him, which was rarely before 8. He asked nothing about his daughter's arrangements during those hours, and she never saw him check his phone for personal reasons, only for navigation, and only the once. On the 3rd morning, she came down to find him standing beside the car with a cup of coffee in each hand. He held one out as she approached. It was from the cart on the corner, not the building's cafe, the one she actually preferred. She'd mentioned once to Dana in passing. She took the cup without comment. He took no credit. They drove. On the 5th day, a man approached the car at a stoplight. He appeared to be asking for directions, reasonable, harmless. Daniel's window stayed up. The car moved forward on yellow without aggression or haste, precisely enough that the interaction simply ended. He had his phone out, she observed from the back seat. Yes, you think he was photographing the car. I think he was photographing you. She looked at the side mirror. The man had already disappeared. Most drivers would have opened the window, she said. Most drivers aren't hired the same morning their predecessor gets fired for leaking schedules. He met her eyes in the rearview mirror. I assumed you'd prefer caution over courtesy. She turned back to her tablet. She didn't respond. But she noted it. It was Maisie who first created the crack in the structure. On Thursday, the sitter arrangement fell through again, a different emergency, a different reason. A child's world still unpredictable, even when arranged. Daniel arrived at the building with his daughter beside him, having already called ahead to Dana with an apology. He had alternate arrangements in place for noon, he said. Could she manage the morning? Victoria took the call from Dana at 7:08 and said, "Bring her up." Maisie was installed in the small conference room adjacent to Dana's desk with a set of colored pencils, her sketchbook, a plate of fruit, and a seriousness of purpose that suggested she had managed waiting rooms many times before. Victoria walked past her once at 9:15. Maisie looked up. "Your building has 6 exits," she said, with the precision of a child reporting on a natural phenomenon. "I drew them all." She held up the sketchbook. The drawing was not a child's drawing. It was recognizable. Accurate. The proportions were off, but the spatial logic was sound. She had understood which corridors connected to which, and represented them in 2 dimensions with an intuition that was not typical. Victoria stopped walking. "How do you know about the exits?" "Daddy always counts exits," Maisie said simply. Then she went back to drawing. Victoria stood in the hallway for a moment. She walked to her office. She closed the door. She ran a deeper search that afternoon. Not through standard channels, through a consultant she used for due diligence on high-risk acquisitions. The kind of man who found things that weren't meant to be found. He called back in 4 hours, which was fast even for him. "Daniel Carver," he said, without preamble. Born in 1986, grew up in Colorado. Studied applied mathematics at the University of Denver. Then goes quiet for almost 10 years, government contract, work, sealed. What I can tell you is the contractor he worked through, Ashwood Security Group. Ashwood handled protection and intelligence operations for senior government officials and selected private clients from 2009 to 2018. Tier 1 work. The people they placed were not driving cars. A pause. He left Ashwood in 2018. Founded a private firm called Carver and Rains Physical Security and Threat Intelligence for corporate clients. Small, but their client list would make your eyes water. They handled 2 Fortune 100 companies and 1 foreign embassy. Another pause. The firm dissolved in 2020. Why? His wife died. Cancer. Rapid onset, she was gone in 5 months. A long pause. He liquidated everything. Took his daughter, and disappeared from professional records entirely. What he's been doing for the past 4 years is not clear. Nothing illegal. Just quiet. Victoria sat very still. "Thank you," she said. She put the phone down. She looked out the window at the city for a long time. Then she looked at the report Dana had placed on the corner of her desk that morning, the one flagging another anomaly. Another data point in the constellation of leaks that had been bleeding her company for 6 weeks. She thought about a man who had built something and then chosen to stop building. She thought about a girl who counted exits. Then she picked up the report and got back to work. What she did not do was tell him what she knew. Not because she didn't trust him, because she wasn't sure how to factor in the shape of his absence, what it meant that a man capable of all of that had chosen this. Had sat in an agency waiting room for a job that didn't exist, and then accepted a smaller one without protest. Was it grief? Calculation? Something else entirely? She watched him more carefully after that. Not with suspicion. With attention, she noticed that he checked every room before she entered it, that he positioned himself at angles that gave him visibility in multiple directions, that he never stood with his back to a door. These were not performed behaviors, they were reflexive, automatic, the way a musician's hands move without thought on strings they've played for years. She noticed that he never asked questions about her work, about the acquisition, about the board tensions that had been in the financial press for 3 weeks. He didn't read those things for information. He read them. She caught him once with a headline visible on his phone, the way someone reads a landscape. Oriented himself, noted the terrain, and moved on. He cooked dinner for his daughter every night. She knew this because once, returning to the parking garage for a forgotten tablet at 8:15, she heard him on a call. Quiet, patient, walking through the steps of a pasta dish with Maisie on the other end, who appeared to be attempting dinner preparation with only partial success and full confidence. He didn't know she'd heard. She didn't mention it. But something shifted in the architecture of her impression. The break came on a Wednesday, 11 days in. Victoria was due at a shareholder briefing at the Aldine Hotel, a building she had used for meetings for 3 years. Familiar ground, standard route, nothing to flag. They were 6 blocks from the hotel when Daniel said, without any change in tone, "Don't reach for your phone." She didn't. Why? Because if someone is monitoring your cellular activity, I'd rather they think we're still en route. We're not. He had already turned off the avenue. There's a car. Black Range Rover. Been with us since we left the building. It changed lanes when I changed lanes. Slowed when I slowed. It's not following the route. It's following us. She looked at the side mirror. "Don't," he said. She didn't. "My security team has been notified of your route since this morning," he said. "If they know, and this car also knows, you should think about what that means." The silence in the car was total. She thought about it. "Marcus Webb," she said quietly. Her chief of security. A man who had been with the company longer than she had, a man her predecessor had hired, and she had retained because institutional knowledge seemed valuable, and because she did not, then, have a reason to question loyalty she hadn't built herself. "I'm not naming anyone," Daniel said. "I'm telling you what I see." "What do you see?" A pause. "I see a car that knows your route. I see a briefing that 4 people in your organization know about. I see a company that's been bleeding information for 6 weeks with no internal source identified." He guided them onto a smaller street. The Range Rover did not follow. "I see someone who's been managing this very carefully, not desperately carefully. Whoever this is, they're not running scared. They're running a plan." She absorbed this. "The briefing is in an hour," she said. "I know. I need to be there. I know." Another pause. "There's a service entrance. Loading dock on Hartley Street. Your contact can meet you there if you call him from this phone." He passed his own phone back without taking his eyes off the road. "It's not registered to you or your company." She took the phone. She looked at it for a moment. Then she made the call. The briefing went forward. The shareholders were briefed. Victoria performed the calm precision required of her, the kind of controlled presence that looked like confidence and was, at its core, disciplined endurance. She said what needed to be said. She answered what could be answered. She smiled the appropriate number of times. In the car afterward, she sat in silence for 6 blocks. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About what?" "That there was a plan. Not just a leak, a plan." He considered the question seriously, which she had learned was his way. He didn't give fast answers to real questions. "Since the 2nd day," he said. "The man at the Blackwood entrance, he wasn't improvising. He was positioned. That kind of positioning takes preparation. It means someone told him not just where you'd be, but where you'd arrive. And had enough lead time to place him." A pause. "Improvised surveillance is sloppy." "This wasn't sloppy. You didn't tell me. You didn't hire me to tell you what I thought." She turned and looked at his profile. He was watching the road. He was always watching the road. "I'm telling you now," she said. "Tell me what you think." He was quiet for a moment. The car moved through an intersection. Rain had started light, barely there. The kind that misted the windows without quite qualifying as weather. "I think," he said carefully, "that whoever is feeding information to Caldwell has been doing it long enough that it's routine for them, long enough that they're not nervous anymore. When people stop being nervous, they make structural mistakes." He paused. "I think you're close to finding it if you look at access rather than motive." "Access to what?" "To everything. Your itinerary, your meeting notes, your route. Not just one of those things, all of them. That narrows the field significantly. Most people have access to one or two. Very few people have access to all three." She was quiet. "Marcus Webb," she said again. Not a question this time. He didn't answer. But he didn't deny it either. 3 days later, the Meridian acquisition collapsed. Not spectacularly, the public-facing story was a mutual decision to pause discussions, the kind of language that meant only what the reader's anxiety filled in. But Victoria knew what had happened. The terms she had negotiated in private, the valuation cap, the earn-out structure, the board seat conditions had appeared in a memo circulated internally at Caldwell Capital, 24 hours before the signing. Meridian's CEO had called her personally to apologize. He'd been approached. The numbers were better. He'd made a business decision. She listened to the apology with the phone pressed very flat against her ear and said very little. The stock dropped 4% in after-hours trading. By the next morning, 2 board members were calling for answers. One of them, Edgar Whitfield, the longest-serving director and the man with the most to gain from a Caldwell partnership, was already on record, saying the acquisition strategy had been poorly managed from a risk perspective. Marcus Webb called a press briefing without her authorization to discuss security enhancements being implemented. He framed it as proactive leadership. He was photographed looking decisive in front of the company logo. Victoria watched the footage from her office with the sound off. Then someone sent her a file. It came through. Dana dropped off at reception in a sealed envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page. A formatted data log showing access timestamps. 9 weeks of them. An internal account accessing her scheduling system, her driver briefings, and her building entry records. The account belonged to Daniel Carver. His name, his access credentials, his timestamps. She sat with the document for 40 minutes without moving. Then she called him in. He stood in her office the way he stood everywhere, not defensively, but as a person who had decided how to occupy space and then committed to it. He read the document she placed on the desk. He read it fully. Then he looked up. "That account was created 8 days ago," he said. "Your name is on it." "My name is on it," he agreed. "It was not created by me. The access credentials are forged or borrowed. Someone in your IT infrastructure created a ghost account and assigned my name to it retroactively. It's a frame." He said this without urgency, without defensiveness, with the flat precision of a person identifying a category of problem they have encountered before. "It's a good one. It would convince most people." "It's convincing me," she said. "I know." A pause. "What would you like me to do?" She looked at him. Something about his stillness made the room feel very large and very quiet. "I'm going to need to let you go," she said. "Until this is resolved." He nodded. "Once you understand this might not be resolved," he said. "If the same person who created the account controls the investigation, I understand." He picked up his jacket from the arm of the chair. He paused at the door. "The access logs are time-stamped," he said. "The actual server logs, not the summary, will show source IP addresses for each entry. If they're all routed through the same internal terminal, that's your answer. It's in the building's network archive." Another pause. "Dana has admin access. She would know how to pull them." He left. She sat very still. Then she called Dana. The next 6 days were the worst of the quarter. Not because of the stock price, though, that continued to slide. Not because of the board, though. Whitfield was now openly calling for a leadership review. It was worse because the quality of the threat changed. Without Daniel in the building, Without his particular quality of attention, things that had been quietly managed began to unravel. A meeting with a potential white knight investor was ambushed. A journalist from a financial outlet appeared in the lobby of the hotel, tipped off, asking for a statement. The investor left. The story ran the next morning, framing the meeting as a desperate search for rescue capital. The framing was Caldwell's language. She recognized it. Her car was followed again. This time, nobody caught it early. The tale lasted 40 minutes before her security team noticed. Webb made another public statement, this time implying, without quite saying, that the security breaches had intensified after recent personnel changes. The implication was pointed. Deniable, but pointed. She read his statement at 9 p.m. on a Thursday, in her office, alone. She thought about a log file that Dana had pulled at her request and placed on her desk that afternoon. She had read it twice. The source IP addresses for all 9 weeks of unauthorized access were consistent, routed through a terminal in the Security Operations Center on the 4th floor, Webb's floor. She closed her laptop. She sat in the dark for a moment. Then she put on her coat and left the building. His address was in the employment file. A rental house in a neighborhood that was quiet in the unpretentious way of places that never needed to perform quietness, mature trees, old sidewalks, houses with front porches that saw actual use. She rang the bell at 10:20 p.m. and was aware that this was unreasonable, and did it anyway. He opened the door in the same dark shirt. He looked at her without surprise. "Maisie's asleep," he said. "I know it's late." He stepped back to let her in. The house was small and ordered with a particular kind of care, the care of a person who lived deliberately in limited space and had made peace with that. Books shelved with obvious logic, a kitchen that had been used that evening, a dish rack still drying, Maisie's drawings on the refrigerator, 6 buildings, rendered with architectural seriousness, each one labeled in a child's careful hand. He made coffee without asking. She sat at the kitchen table. "I found the IP logs," she said. He placed a cup in front of her and sat across from her. "And?" "All routed from the 4th floor Security Operations Center." She looked at him. "Webb's floor." He said nothing. "I also found something else," she said. "Your firm, Carver and Raines. Before it dissolved, Caldwell Capital was one of the companies you flagged in a threat assessment. You identified them as a hostile acquisition risk for a different firm you were protecting. 3 years ago." He was quiet for a moment. "That's accurate. So you knew who they were when you came to my building." "I knew their methods," he said. "When I saw the credential badge and the range of the leak, yes, I recognized the pattern." She looked at him directly. "Then why didn't you tell me any of this?" He met her gaze. His eyes were the particular color of deep water in winter, not cold, but honest about depth. "Because I had been hired as a driver," he said. "I was not asked to be anything else." A pause. "And because the last time I brought all of that back," he stopped. Something moved across his expression, contained and brief, like weather on a distant ridge. "I chose to stop doing that kind of work for a reason." "Your wife," she said. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of something that had already been acknowledged in other ways. "I was gone," he said finally. "For too long. Too many times." And then when it mattered most, he looked at his coffee cup. "I was on a job. She was diagnosed on a Tuesday. I didn't know until Thursday. That's not something you recover your way back to thinking you were right about." A pause. "So, I stopped." She let that settle without trying to fill it. "And now?" she said. He looked up. "Now I have a daughter who counts exits," he said. "And I'd like that to be enough." She nodded. She understood this. She did not argue with it. "I need your help," she said. "Not as a driver. As what you actually are." He studied her. "The board meets Friday," she said. "Whitfield is pushing for a leadership review. If Caldwell moves this week, and I think they're going to, they'll have the numbers. Webb will testify that the security failures were systemic and trace them to my management. The forged log is already in circulation internally. I have 48 hours before the story they've built becomes the only story." "What do you need?" I need the real logs presented at that board meeting. And I need someone who can explain what they mean in a way that's impossible to dismiss. She held his gaze. Not a lawyer, not a consultant, someone who can walk into that room and make it clear, in 40 minutes, that what happened here was a deliberate, coordinated intelligence operation and that there is a senior employee in this company who ran it. He was quiet. Somewhere in the back of the house, Maisie shifted in her sleep a small sound, a child's sound. The sound of a person for whom the world was still mostly safe. He looked at his coffee. I'd need full access to the server logs, he said. And the original Ashwood threat assessment from 3 years ago, I kept copies. I can get you the logs, she said. Dana will pull whatever you need. He looked at her for a long moment. Friday, he said. That's 2 days. I know. He stood up. He put both cups in the sink. He turned around. Go home and sleep, he said. I'll have something by morning. The Friday session was scheduled for 9 a.m. Victoria arrived at 8:50 with Dana beside her, and nothing on her face that she hadn't chosen to put there. Whitfield was already seated, which was unusual. Webb was positioned near the AV equipment in the way of someone who planned to present. The other 4 board members arrived in the pattern of people who had been briefed privately and expected a specific outcome. At 9:03, the door opened. Daniel Carver walked in. He wore a dark jacket that had been recently pressed. A white shirt. No tie. He carried a laptop and a single printed packet, which he placed in front of the chair at the presentation end of the table. Webb's face did something complicated. He recovered it fast, but not quite fast enough. Who authorized this? Whitfield began. I did, Victoria said. As CEO, I have the authority to bring subject matter experts to board sessions. Mr. Carver is presenting on the security matter that's been placed on today's agenda. Mr. Carver was terminated. Mr. Carver's employment was suspended pending review, she said. The review is complete. She sat down. The room settled. Daniel opened the laptop. He did not preamble. He did not thank anyone for their time or acknowledge the tension in the room. He simply began. I'm going to walk through 9 weeks of unauthorized access to executive systems in this company, he said. I'll cover 3 categories of evidence: source identification, timeline correlation, and behavioral signature. He pulled up the first slide, not a slide in the conventional sense, but a clean table of data, structured with a precision that suggested someone who had presented evidence before in contexts where imprecision had consequences. The access logs you've been shown, the ones bearing my name, were created through a ghost account established 8 days ago. This is verifiable through the server's own creation timestamps, which cannot be retroactively altered without administrative access. The timestamps on the ghost account do not match the timestamps on the underlying access logs. He advanced the slide. Here are both sets of timestamps. The delta is consistent and specific. Whitfield leaned forward. Anyone could generate this kind of. The source IP addresses, Daniel continued, without raising his voice or breaking pace, for all access events over the 9-week period route through a single terminal. Building Registry Terminal ID 4SECOPCORE12. That terminal is located in the Security Operations Center on the 4th floor. He advanced the slide again. This is the access card log for that room. One senior employee accounts for 91% of the after-hours access to that room over the same period. He clicked. The name appeared. Marcus Webb. Webb's chair pushed back slightly. Involuntary. Small. Noticed by everyone. I would like to note, Daniel said, that I am not presenting this as accusation. I am presenting it as data. The data is verifiable through your IT infrastructure, which I recommend be frozen and independently audited immediately. He advanced again. The second category is timeline correlation. Each major Leak the Blackwood meeting, the Meridian acquisition terms, the Aldine investor briefing occurred within a window consistent with access from the identified terminal. The correlation is not coincidental. I have mapped each event against each access timestamp in this packet. He tapped the printed pages. The full documentation is in front of you. He looked at the board members without particular expression. The third category is behavioral signature. The methods used: ghost accounts, shell vehicle registrations, contractor badge surveillance match, documented operational patterns from Caldwell Capital's intelligence unit. I identified these same patterns 3 years ago in a threat assessment for a different corporate client. The original assessment is in the packet. Caldwell's methods are consistent. They customize the target but not the infrastructure. He closed the laptop. The room was absolutely still. I've been a driver for the past 2 weeks, he said. Before that, I ran a security firm. Before that, I operated at a level I'm not going to specify because it doesn't serve today's purpose. He looked at Marcus Webb. I want to be precise about what happened here, so that the people in this room can make accurate decisions. What happened here was a coordinated action to weaken this company's leadership and manufacture a board crisis sufficient to facilitate an acquisition. It has been running for 9 weeks. It has a human source inside this building. The evidence points clearly to that source. He picked up his jacket. That's everything I have, he said. The rest is your decision. He walked to the door. Mr. Carver, Whitfield said. His voice had lost whatever authority it had entered the room with. How long would you say this operation has been in preparation? Daniel paused at the door. He considered the question. Long enough that someone bet heavily on you not finding out. He looked back, once, at Victoria. They bet wrong. He left. Webb was escorted from the premises by external security at 11:45 that morning, not internal, because Victoria had thought that through in advance. His badge was deactivated at the same moment. The IT director she trusted initiated a full system audit at noon. Whitfield, who had, it emerged, been in communication with Caldwell, but had not crossed the line into actionable misconduct, which was its own specific category of cowardice, tendered his board resignation by close of business. The Caldwell vehicle that had been parked intermittently outside the building for 2 weeks did not appear the following Monday. She found him on Saturday afternoon. He was at a park 2 blocks from his house, not a manicured park, but the kind with old equipment and mature oaks, and the particular democratic quality of public space that doesn't ask you to perform anything. Maisie was on a climbing structure with the focused intensity of a small engineer conducting a structural assessment. Victoria sat down on the bench beside him. She was not in work clothes. She was wearing jeans and a jacket that was more expensive than it looked, which was not the same as being casual, but was closer to it than she usually managed. She told me, Maisie called down from the structure, without looking at them, that you were going to offer you a job. She? Victoria said. Donna. Maisie, Daniel said, evenly. I'm just saying. She disappeared around the other side of the structure. Victoria looked at the ground for a moment. Then she looked at him. I was going to offer you a job. She said. I know. Head of security. Or an advisory role, if you prefer more autonomy. The compensation would be significant. He nodded slowly. He was watching his daughter move through the climbing structure with the particular attention of a parent who trusts their child to take appropriate risks and wants to be present for them. No, he said. She had expected this. She had prepared for it. She had still hoped for a different answer. The work you did was something I was willing to do for a specific reason, in a specific situation, he said. That's not the same as being willing to do it indefinitely. He paused. I've had jobs where the work consumed everything. I was very good at those jobs. I was not particularly present for the things outside them. He watched Maisie reach the top platform and stand there, looking out at the park with proprietary satisfaction. I made a decision about that. I understand, she said. She meant it. I'll help you, he said. If something specific comes up, something that actually requires what I'm able to do. Not as a retainer, not as an employee. As someone who chooses, when it matters. She looked at him. That's a very specific offer, she said. It's the one I'm able to make. She thought about it. It was not what she had come to ask for. It was also, possibly, more honest than what she had come to ask for. All right, she said. Maisie came down from the structure at speed and ran directly to the bench. She looked at Victoria with open assessment. "Did she say yes?" she asked her father. "She said all right," he said. "That's the same thing," Maisie said, with the confidence of someone whose dictionary had no room for nuance, and then ran back to the structure. Victoria almost laughed. It was a real, almost close enough to feel the pull of it. "She counted 6 exits in my building," Victoria said. "7, he said. "She counts the service elevator separately. She's not wrong to. No." A pause. "She's not wrong about most things. It's occasionally inconvenient." The afternoon light shifted through the oaks. The park continued its Saturday life around them. A dog, a bicycle. The distant sound of a child insisting loudly on something. "My assistant," Victoria said carefully, "has mentioned that Maisie's school is close to our building." He looked at her. "It would be a reasonable route," she said. "If someone were going that direction in the morning." He was quiet. "I don't need a driver," she said. "I'm being clear about that." That's not what I'm saying." "I know what you're saying," he said. The silence between them had a quality she recognized from the best conversations, the kind where the absence of words doesn't mean absence of meaning, but the opposite. "Monday," he said finally. "If traffic is reasonable." She nodded. She did not make a formal thing of it. She looked at the park. He looked at the park. Maisie made an announcement from the top of the climbing structure about the structural integrity of the third rung that nobody had asked for, but that was probably useful information. And the afternoon continued, quiet and ordinary and very gently beginning.